Cool, so the meeting is being recorded, and then I'm gonna go ahead and start sharing my screen and get started. All right, great. Is everyone seeing a bright red slide?
Yes.
Cool. Awesome. Well, welcome everyone, right, to our inaugural Operate First Data Science Community Meetup. Thank you all for attending. My name is Michael Clifford, and I'm a data scientist and data science manager working at Red Hat in the office of the CTO as a member of the AI Center of Excellence, where I'm working on, among other things, the Operate First project. So today is really going to be like episode 1, right? Like, what is Operate First for data science? And today is going to be about introducing the concept of Operate First to everyone, why it's relevant to data scientists, and how you can get started today, getting on the Operate First platform and spinning up a development environment of your own. So hopefully this shouldn't take like the full hour. So any time left over can be used for discussion or Q&A or whatever we want to do with the rest of that time. Cool. So let's get started. So Operate First is like it's a large project that really goes beyond strictly data science related topics. And a full overview of what Operate First is a little bit outside of the scope of what I want to talk about today. But I do encourage all of you to go to operate-first.com after the talk and check out the kind of project overall. Today, I'm going to focus on kind of outlining enough of the project to make sense of Operate First, to make sense of the Operate First data science community. And my hope is that in the next 15 minutes, right, the relationship between Operate First at large and the Operate First data science community will become really clear. So cool. So our goal, right, for this Operate First data science community is really about we want to educate and collaborate with anyone who's interested in learning more about how people are working towards democratizing the development of production level AI, and specifically with regard to doing that in the domain of cloud native development. And really what that means, right, is it's about like kind of collectively investigating the question, how do we make cloud native data science development more open, more accessible, and ultimately more reliable? And my hope is that we can do this like together by addressing the kind of multidisciplinary nature of the current state of AI development and cloud operations, and kind of covering technical topics together that are relevant to data scientists, to software engineers, to DevOps professionals, and really like the intersection of the work of those groups. And again, to do this all like in a fully public forum, like we're doing today. Great. So I hope that was clear of the goals of what we're trying to do with this community are clear by that. Next, I will quickly provide an overview of the Operate First project that should put into context how and why data science is specifically important to this work. Oh, sorry. There's an animation here that I forgot about. So the Operate First data science community. Great. So, right, in short, the Operate First is kind of both an idea and a project, right? It's an approach. It's a way of approaching cloud operations and software development, but it's also like a group of real people and real machines that are actually implementing this approach. So this is a definition that the kind of creators of Operate First came up with for what it means. I'm not going to read it here verbatim, but you can read it if you'd like as I continue. But really what it means is it's about Operate First is about addressing an existing gap in the software development lifecycle where like the actual operating of an application is not sufficiently proved out by the developers, and the knowledge of how to operate these applications, right, the like operational experience does not exist in any kind of traditional open source format. So by providing an open production community cloud where we operate our software first, or where we operate first, right, we are able to extend the open source software development process to include operating in the cloud, essentially. Cool, so that's like the definition, that's the idea behind operate first, the goal of operate first, but why do we think that it would actually work? Like, why will it work? So I am going to read this statement again from the inceptors of the operate first idea. But so they think that it should work because having developers, and also that extends to us data scientists, bring their code to a production cloud where they can work with the cloud operators and experience firsthand its operational considerations, as well as vetting the functionality of the platform, can create this feedback loop that allows developers to address and enhance their code's operations and ideally fix bugs as well. So that's ultimately why so I think that's fairly clear, self-explanatory, right? By running projects on a community cloud where operators and developers are directly interacting with one another, this generates this beneficial feedback loop that can improve both the application itself, the applications themselves, and the platform. Cool. So that's why we think that the operate first should work, right? As a development process, an open source project. But so far, this has just been a little bit of talk, right, around kind of an updated philosophy around software development. You might be asking yourself, like, okay, so like, is any of this real? Like, where is this community cloud that you're referring to? And the answer to that question is yes. So we do currently have an existing community hybrid cloud set up. We currently have clusters in the United States that are associated with Boston University, part of the MOC, which is the Massachusetts Open Cloud. We have some clusters in Germany, as well as one that's part of an AWS cluster. And we're continuing to working on extending this community cloud. And all of this is managed through our Operate First organization that's publicly available on GitHub. So what are we doing with these clusters? What are we like operating? So we run Kubernetes and OpenShift on top of them. We are using GitOps best practices in public repos to manage everything that's being done there. We're generating operational data that we can make public as well. And I'll talk a little bit later about why that's really important and relevant to our data science folks. And then finally, on top of all of that, we are running real workloads, running applications. Oops. And the main workload that we are currently operating first at the moment is Open Data Hub, or ODH. Cool. So that just like quickly to let all of you know that this community cloud like is a real thing and it currently exists, and we are running workloads on top of it today. So now I want to talk a little bit about this specific workload that we're actually running right now, or the main one that we're running. So it's called Open Data Hub. What is Open Data Hub? It is what we refer to as like a meta project. So it integrates some open source tools to provide aimed at providing an end-to-end machine learning application on top of OpenShift. So like a meta project is really aimed at integrating multiple open source projects into one project that is easily deployed by users. Open Data Hub also has like both upstream and downstream relationship with many of the open source projects that it's involved with. The main downstream project is Kubeflow. However, it's also downstream of other projects like Selden, Elira, Kafka, Spark, Grafana, and Prometheus. And so all of these things taken together provide this comprehensive end-to-end machine learning platform that we call Open Data Hub. So when we say we're running Data Hub, it really means that we're running all of these services for data scientists. So Data Hub in and of itself is like a huge separate project in its own right. And if you're interested in getting more involved or learning more about the Open Data Hub side of things, I encourage you to go to opendatahub.io and check it out. But if you just want to like get started messing around with it, you can go on to, you can start using it right now through Operate First. Cool. So now hopefully I've put some context around what is Operate First, what is currently being operated there. And I hope all of you are starting to see how data science is relevant to this project. And specifically, right, the main tool that we are operating is one that's designed specifically for data scientists. But I think what we're doing here really goes a bit beyond just being users of the Operate First cluster and Open Data Hub. So where is the data science, right? So now you might be asking yourself, like, why should I get involved with the Operate First data science community? What's in it for me? Well, as a data scientist myself, there are a couple of things that are important to me that I would look for, like in a data science community. And what is that? First thing is resources, right? So having access to compute resources to do my work, particularly those that are free of any operational costs to me. Solid ways of collaborating with other data scientists to like share notebooks and other reproducible content and experiments, and just general like data science, software engineering collaboration. A way to create reliable and reproducible experiments and environments. An easy path for me to actually get my models out into the world with like simple deployments of pipelines and inference models. And then last but not least, like interesting problems and interesting data to actually get access to. So if I'm a data scientist, these are the kinds of things that are important to me. And obviously, this is not like a comprehensive list, but I think it does a pretty good job of kind of covering some of these major items. So does getting involved with the Operate First data science community address any of these requests? Well, I think it gives me an OpenShift cluster with Open Data Hub deployed to develop and run my machine learning applications. It also provides access to the operators, like the actual people and developers. So the operators of the cloud and the developers of the tool, like Open Data Hub, where we can actually have an impact on how those tools are getting developed moving forward. The community already has a number of like GitHub organizations and repositories, along with some defined kind of like data science best practices that are being constantly refined that we use to share and collaborate openly on data science projects. We have tools in place by using Git to help us build custom images so that we can publish and share reproducible experiments and other content that we want to share with folks. The images that we are using through Jupyter Hub currently include things like Elira, Kubeflow, and Selden for like simple machine learning deployment and model serving. So we also, and in addition to that, we also have like a solid user base, like myself and other members of our team, and documentation of using these tools. So it's really easy to get good support and feedback. And the final thing is that since there is a community cloud, right? Since this community cloud exists, it's generating real production operations data that can be made publicly available for tackling machine learning problems in the AIOps domain. And I'll get into a second why that's important. So as you can see from this list, right, it's really there's a lot of stuff provided through as a cloud native data scientist. There's a lot of things here that sound good to me. It has resources, services, support, access to the people maintaining, developing, and using all of these things, as well as access to interesting data. So I hope that already that's kind of enough reason to stick around and get involved with the community here. There's one more thing that I wanted to discuss, and that's kind of how AIOps fits into this picture. Cool. So I'm not going to give a full discussion here on what AIOps is, but maybe we'll do an upcoming talk about that. But in short, it's the idea that we can improve IT operations through the application of some AI tools. And unfortunately, AIOps currently suffers from a data problem. And so in order to do machine learning, artificial intelligence, we need to have some data. However, the data that's being generated that would be useful for AIOps is largely internal server data, and it's not something that companies generally feel comfortable open sourcing and making publicly available. So this means that there's no MNIST of AIOps right now. There's no real trusted benchmark data set that can be used to reliably push the field forward. So one of the additional goals of the Operate First data science community is to kind of generate and collect this data. And this is actually done by us by just using the platform, right? So as data scientists, we're generating not just baseline operations data, but machine learning workload operations data. So what happens, so we can generate data that describes what happens to a machine when a cluster is running what some are considering to be the most important workload of the 21st century, right? So machine learning applications. So cool. So with that, we can now start to work on developing open source applications that actually target the operations of the cluster that we run our very own machine learning workloads on. So that's pretty cool. And that would then feed back into the operations platform, of course. So since we're already closely integrated with the platform operators, we can get our solutions implemented and tested much rather easily. And this really creates that cycle like we discussed at the beginning. Another beneficial feedback loop that can improve both our applications as well as the platform itself. Cool. So I just wanted to make that clear that the Operate First data science community is both about using the platform for data agnostic projects and exploring new cloud native data science tooling, as much as it's also about improving that very same platform itself through explorations of AIOps projects. Cool. So that's kind of the spiel. I know that was a lot of talk. Does anyone have any questions at this point? The next thing I'm going to do is give a quick demo for how to actually get onto the cluster and spin up a Jupyter Lab environment and start to work there. Before I do that, any questions? Awesome. Cool. So, and then for this demo, again, this is an open community cloud. So I encourage you all to follow along. Hopefully it should work fine for you. So the first thing to do here is to go to operate-first.cloud. This is the main hub for the Operate First project. As I said, there's much more than just what we're talking about today, and I encourage you to investigate this website more fully to get a bigger sense of the project. But if you just want to get started with some data science stuff, you can go to the Hitchhiker's Guide here. And on the left-hand side here, you'll see a number of applications that are actually being operated. The one we want to look at here is Open Data Hub, and go to Overview. And this will show us the list of components that are currently being deployed. The cluster names change as the clusters evolve, but we're currently working with Smog. So we can go to Jupyter Hub, OPF, Jupyter Hub, Apps, Smog, and this should just going. Cool. So first thing you have to do is log into the cluster. I believe if you have a GitHub account, you can just authenticate through GitHub. So we can do that. I'll click the operate first. And then it will take you to a Jupyter Hub spawner page. I'm assuming also here that mostly everyone is familiar with Jupyter Notebooks and Jupyter Lab. We'll have another talk in a few weeks, so maybe we'll get more into the details of how they work. But so this is Jupyter Hub, which is essentially like a Kubernetes OpenShift application for deploying Jupyter Hub pods for us to work on our clusters. And the first thing that you get here is a spawner page where you have some options about what it is that is going to be spawned for you. The first thing that you'll notice is these notebook images, and there's a whole list of them. So these are maintained by our teams, and you can go ahead and create your own and add it to this list. So this is the way that we publish and share reproducible or one of the ways that we share and publish some reproducible content. So there's two types of images that you'll see here. And again, how we generate these will also be in a future talk. There's also docs and videos and resources that currently exist that have some of this stuff. But you can see here something like AICOE Elira AI DevSecOps tutorial. So this is an image that contains both the requirements for running the code that's there, as well as the content, as well as the notebooks and different things that are needed. So somebody's work is being packaged and represented in this image. Then we have other ones like the Ray ML notebook or Elira notebook that are just kind of working environments that have some predefined set of requirements that we're going to use. So there's no content associated with it. It's just like a stack of requirements. So I'm going to pick the Elira notebook image today because it's a clean, nice one that has Jupyter Lab. Then the next thing that we have here is the deployment size. So we can actually choose what size of container we want to deploy. There's resources that can be set by the administrator for your particular account. That would be defaults. But you also have the option of choosing small, medium, or large, depending on the specific work that you're going to do that day. So small is maybe just reading some notebooks. Large is if you're going to actually be doing some data crunching or whatever that might be. So today I'll just do small. And then it also allows us to set our environment variables ahead of time before we spawn our pod. So this way we can inject specific information into our pod that we probably don't want exposed. So it's like API credentials and things like that, but it could be anything. So you can add more variables. I'll call this S3 key. I'll call it 1, 2, 3, 4, and make it a secret so nobody else can see it. And you can go on and do this as much as you want to have all of the environment variables that you need injected into your pod. One of the main reasons we do this is to specifically put S3 credentials in, because even though you have a persistent volume claim that where you can keep some information, it's more designed for, it's more, I guess, better used for like notebooks and Python code and things like that, and not really big data sets. For that, we rely on interacting with an S3 bucket. So So cool. So let's go ahead and start our server. So this might take a couple minutes depending on the
Hey,
activity.
Michael, it's, any question anytime, right?
Yeah, sure.
Good. Was just a reminder. That's my question.
Okay. Yes, questions anytime. This also, as this can take a couple moments, might be a good time for questions, but maybe it's going quicker than I thought. Anyways, what this is doing now is essentially spinning up a pod, an ephemeral pod, and connecting it to the persistent volume claim that you have. So that's kind of like your local storage in the cloud. So like I said, that's as you do work, you work on a particular GitHub repo or some project or anything in there, those things will stay. But any changes you actually make to the working environment will be reset every time you start a new pod. So that's just something to be aware of. Any questions?
I've got a question, Michael. Are there any GPUs available in these clusters?
So at the moment, there are no GPUs available. Well, there's one in the AWS cluster. There's a couple of GPUs available, which is associated with the OS Climate project. So we have, but the smog cluster, we know the GPUs are like physically at the MOC, and we're waiting to get them like installed.
Cool.
Great. So come on. What? Sorry, I'm not sure what's going on here. Oh, here we go. Okay. Great. Excellent. So this is what the Jupyter Lab environment looks like. So as a data scientist, it's off like one of the things we're thinking about here is like how do we like migrate the work of a data scientist off of their local machine into like a cloud native environment. And so this is like the Jupyter Lab is something I would use on my machine. So it looks identical to what it would be locally used for me. So I hope that's clear. I'm not sure exactly how many people here are familiar with the Jupyter Lab, Jupyter notebook environments, but I'm just going to assume some familiarity and show you what we can do here. So with Jupyter Lab, we've now spun up a pod for us to work in. You can see here on the left-hand side is the directory of my PVC where my like existing work has been maintained. I can do a number of things when I get on. I can spin or I can generate a new Python notebook. I can create a console, some Elira tooling that we'll talk about again in a later talk. And I can also just open up a terminal. So it really like exists as my workspace. And from the terminal, I can do all kinds of normal things. As long as it doesn't require sudo, I can pretty much do anything here. So I can see all of the work that all the directories that I have available to me. Maybe I'm interested in how much space I actually have left on my PVC because for whatever reason, if the PVCs get full, that can cause some weird issues. So I want to make sure that that's all good before I maybe download a data set that I'm going to mess with. And so I can just do dfh, and that will show me, right, that I have 17 gigabytes of free space. That's cool. I can also check what Python packages I have available to me. Just all kinds of normal command line stuff that you would want to do. So that makes it pretty easy to do things that you'd want to do that you can't necessarily do directly inside of a notebook. But beyond that, you can open a notebook quickly. So the first thing I want to show you all is just that those environment variables that we set earlier actually made it into the pod. So I'm just importing OS and hitting Shift-Enter to run the cell and create a new one below. What do we call it? S3. And it should tell us that we have the right environment variable. Oh, it did not work. Did I call it something different? Yes, great. Okay, so this environment variable that we had set in the spawner page is available to us and accessible. So awesome. We can also now do whatever we would normally do in a Jupyter notebook, that is writing Python code. We can also create Markdown in order to annotate the code that we're working on. We can generate graphs. We can do all kinds of different things. So cool. We can also rename this as test and actually get out of it and be done working. One of the things to note is that these kernels and notebooks will still run in the background. So you can actually go to this little tab here and shut everything down. So shutting down the kernel as well as shutting down the terminals to free up space. So cool. So yeah, so this is the Jupyter Lab environment. I prefer it a little bit over the Jupyter Notebook environment. It's just a little bit more of a modern IDE. It also has a more extensive suite of extensions, including this extension manager, so you can get some additional tooling in there. And cool. So yeah, so that's mainly what I wanted to show everyone today. Hopefully people were able to follow along and actually do some of this stuff and get started. The last thing to be aware of is this is obviously a shared environment. So when you're done working, it's good practice to go to the hub control panel and stop your server. And that should free up the resources for everyone else. When you're working on this stuff, you just might be asking yourself, okay, I was where's the community part of any of that? So when you're working on that, I come to the Operate First Cloud website, but more importantly, up here are a number of important links. So there's our GitHub repository, GitHub organization for Operate First. And here we have specifically the support organization. And here is not really used to manage any code. It's more about creating issues and having conversations about help and support and different things you need for managing any of the Operate First clusters that we're working on. So that's one way to get support and get engaged with the community. The other, more immediate, but often still ties back to the GitHub, is to get involved with Slack. So if you join our Slack community, there's a support page where we're discussing things all the time. You can ask, well, why is my pod not working or anything of interest to you. There's also a data science channel where we can just, oh, you are not seeing any of this, are you? Sorry. Well, trust me, if you go on to the link, there's a bunch of channels where you can get support and talk to people. If you're interested in just like learning more about stuff and maybe jumping ahead of some of the content that we plan to give in the next over the next few meetups, you can go to our YouTube channel, Operate First, and learn a bunch of stuff. The two that are probably most interesting to people here would be the Espresso series and then the AI for continuous integration, where we actually are doing a real project implementing a lot of these things in the AIOps domain. Cool. So again, that was everything I wanted to share with everyone today. Saw there were some questions that came through here.
Or just a comment. So Daniel asked for the Slack link. I think it's on the upper right corner of the Operate First website, right? There's an invite link.
Yeah, so if you click on here, you should be able to get the invites to Slack. You should also be able to find it on the...
No, stop it, Michael. Upper right corner. There's an invite link. That's good enough. Everybody
Okay, all right. However you want to get there. There's many channels. Cool. Great. So any other questions, concerns, discussion points?
Another question. Who are you guys? There were the question to is GPU available? There were the question how to put these environment variables in there. So we are trying to cover a lot of personas, right? So we are focusing on the data scientist, but also on the open data hub operator himself, herself. So maybe just a short ping in the chat. Are you a data scientist or more like a data scientist? I'm pretty sure not everybody of us is just single person. We are most often split brain. So maybe you can just put a short data scientist or ODH operator or open shift operator or an application developer thing in the chat so that we know who you guys are. I mean, a few names I do know, so that's okay. You're free.
Yeah, you could put it in this chat. You could also put it in the Slack channel so it doesn't evaporate after this meeting. But
or just talk about it and introduce yourself.
any other question, discussion points? Anyone has? Cool. So actually, one other thing I'd like to share with everyone before we get off here is that, again, this is a community. We are kind of have some idea of what we want to share with everyone over the next couple of sessions. But obviously, if you have something that you think would be interesting or relevant or get on to the cluster and start working on a project, that's something we'd very much like to hear about. And the main way in which we are trying to keep track of all of that work is through obviously a GitHub, an open GitHub repository. And you can, or I would appreciate, if you opened an issue in the Operate First Data Science Community repository, and we can keep track of topics that way. That was the last little piece of housekeeping I wanted to share with everyone. Great. If there's nothing else, we can get off a few minutes early, but I'll stay a little bit longer if anybody wants to chat about this or anything else.